Imagine owing someone $34 trillion dollars and still being allowed to borrow more. Sounds insane, right? But that's exactly what one country is doing right now. And the craziest part? That's not even the most terrifying debt story out there. So, why are countries borrowing insane amounts of money they can never realistically repay? Who's lending them this money? And why would anyone trust a nation drowning in debt? What happens when the bill finally comes due? And get this, one of the world's most indebted countries owes more than twice its entire economy. And no one's panicking. Why? In this video, we're diving deep into a global financial rabbit hole, from the US and Japan's jaw-dropping IOUs to the shadowy institutions quietly holding the world's debt strings. And trust me, by the end, you'll never look at money, power, or debt the same way again. Section 1. What is national debt and why do countries borrow? Alright, let's rewind for a second. Before we tackle who owes what, we need to understand what this whole national debt thing even means. Because unlike your credit card bill or student loans, national debt isn't just about overspending or bad budgeting. It's way more nuanced and way more powerful. So picture this. A country is like a giant household. It earns money through taxes. That's its income. But it also spends money on roads, hospitals, schools, armies, and, well, lots of other stuff. And just like you might need to take out a loan to buy a house or start a business, countries borrow when they need extra cash to keep things running. Sometimes it's to stimulate the economy during a crisis, like printing money during a pandemic to avoid a total collapse. Other times it's for long-term investments in infrastructure, education, or innovation that will hopefully pay off later. But here's where it gets tricky. Countries don't just borrow from one place. They issue something called government bonds. Basically, they say, hey, if you lend us money now, we promise to pay you back later, with interest. These bonds are bought by banks, other countries, investment funds, even regular citizens. So in theory, national debt isn't inherently bad. In fact, every modern country borrows, even the richest ones. The real question is, how much is too much? When does borrowing become dangerous? Because while a little debt can boost growth, too much can become a ticking time bomb. Just ask Greece in 2010, Argentina in the early 2000s, or Sri Lanka more recently. When lenders lose faith that a country can repay what it owes, the entire economy can spiral fast. But ironically, the biggest debtors today aren't failing countries. They're global superpowers, which raises a much more puzzling question. If even the richest nations are deep in debt, and they keep borrowing more, how is this whole thing not collapsing already? That's what makes national debt so fascinating and so dangerous. It's not about how much you owe. It's about who trusts you enough to keep lending. And in some cases, that trust is built on nothing more than reputation. Section 2. Top 5 most indebted countries in the world. So now you're probably wondering, who are the biggest borrowers on Earth? Let's count them down. And spoiler, some of the names on this list might surprise you. We're measuring this by debt-to-GDP ratio, basically how much a country owes compared to how much it makes in a year. It's like if you made $50,000 annually, but owed $100,000. That'd be a 200% debt-to-income ratio. And yeah, that'd raise some eyebrows. All right, coming in at number 5. Number 5. Italy. Yep, pizza, pasta, and public debt. Italy has been juggling high debt for decades. The government borrows heavily to fund pensions, healthcare, and bloated public programs. But here's the kicker. It's part of the Eurozone, which means it can't just print more euros like the US prints dollars. So when Italy's economy slows down, it can't use the usual tricks to bounce back, making its debt harder to manage. And yet, the system limps on, somehow. Number 4. Eritrea. Bet you didn't see this one coming. Eritrea, a small nation in the Horn of Africa, has racked up massive debt through war, militarization, and isolation. Most of it is owed to domestic sources and a few foreign backers. What's wild is how little transparency there is. The economy runs almost like a black box, and no one's really sure how sustainable it is. That uncertainty? Terrifying. Number 3. Greece. Ah, Greece, the cautionary tale of the 2010s. After years of overspending and tax evasion, Greece's economy crashed hard. Bailouts from the EU and the IMF followed, but with brutal conditions. Think austerity, pension cuts, mass protests, and a generation of young people leaving the country. Greece became the poster child for what happens when debt goes nuclear, and it still hasn't fully recovered. Number 2. Sudan. Sudan's massive debt is a result of decades of civil war, political instability, and economic mismanagement. Much of this debt is so old and unpaid that it's considered odious debt, meaning it may never realistically be paid back. And with the country still in conflict, managing finances is the least of its problems. It's a brutal reminder of how political chaos fuels financial chaos. Number 1. Japan. Yes, you heard that right. Japan owes 2.5 times more than it makes in a year. That's not just high, that's record-breaking. And yet, no crisis, no defaults, no protests in the streets. Why? Well, that's where things get really interesting. Most of Japan's debt is actually owed to itself. Its own citizens and institutions are the lenders. So instead of worrying about angry foreign creditors, Japan is playing a strange internal game of I owe you. But how long can that really last? And here's the twist. Some of the lowest debt countries on Earth? They're not rich. They're just underdeveloped. Think Congo or Afghanistan. Not because they're financially disciplined, but because no one's willing to lend them money in the first place. So being debt-free isn't always a flex. Sometimes it's a red flag. But let's now zoom in on the biggest debtor in dollar terms. The financial behemoth with $34 trillion in IOUs and counting. Welcome to the United States. Section 3. The United States, world's largest debtor. Okay, buckle up, because this is where things go from wow to wait, how is this even real? The United States doesn't just have debt. It has the largest national debt in human history, over $34 trillion and growing by the second. Let that sink in. If you stacked 34 trillion $1 bills on top of each other, they'd reach the moon. 7 times. And yet, America is still borrowing more. Every single day. So, how did we get here? Let's roll back a few decades. The U.S. has been running budget deficits, spending more than it earns, since the early 1980s. Wars, tax cuts, stimulus packages, economic crises. They all added layers to the pile. Then came 2008. Then COVID. Each time the government opened the floodgates and borrowed more to keep the economy alive. And it worked. Sort of. Because here's the weird thing. No one stopped trusting America. Why? One word. Confidence. The US dollar is the world's reserve currency. That means other countries want to hold it. US government bonds? Seen as one of the safest investments on Earth. It's like America is that friend who's always broke, but somehow gets unlimited credit cards because, hey, they run the system. But here's the twist. Interest payments on this debt are now over $1 trillion a year. That's more than the US spends on defense, or education, or almost anything else. In fact, if interest payments were a country, they'd have a bigger economy than 90% of the planet. And yet, politicians rarely talk about cutting spending. Because raising taxes or slashing programs? Not exactly vote winners. So the debt keeps climbing. And most Americans have no idea what that actually means for them. Will taxes go up? Will inflation spiral? Will foreign investors one day pull the plug? No one knows. But here's the scary part. The entire global economy is built on the assumption that the US will never default, ever. If that trust cracks, the ripple effect could make 2008 look like a minor hiccup. But before we imagine that worst-case scenario, let's take a look at the one country whose debt makes even America's look reasonable. A country where the national debt is more than double the size of the economy. Let's talk about Japan. Section 4. Japan. Debt beyond imagination. If the US is drowning in debt, then Japan is swimming at the bottom of the ocean. Its debt-to-GDP ratio, around 260%. That's more than 2.5 times what the entire Japanese economy produces in a year. And yet, Japan isn't collapsing. In fact, it's calm, peaceful, functioning. So what gives? To understand this economic paradox, let's rewind. In the 1990s, Japan experienced what economists call the lost decade. The stock market and housing bubble burst, growth flatlined, and deflation kicked in hard. In response, the government started borrowing like crazy to stimulate the economy. Infrastructure projects, social programs, public investments. Decades later, the borrowing never stopped. But here's the twist. Japan's debt is mostly domestic. Unlike many countries that rely on foreign investors, over 90% of Japan's government bonds are owned by its own people. Pension funds, insurance companies, banks, and even the central bank itself. It's like the government owes its citizens a giant IOU. And those citizens? Well, they're famously risk-averse savers. So instead of putting their money in the stock market or crypto, they park it in government bonds. Safe, predictable, boring. But there's a catch, and it's a big one. Japan has the oldest population in the world, and as more retirees cash in their savings, there will be fewer young workers to buy new government bonds. Less demand equals higher interest, equals heavier debt burden. It's a ticking demographic time bomb. So while Japan's economy hasn't exploded yet, it's walking a tightrope, blindfolded, with a population that's shrinking fast. The real question isn't if Japan can manage its debt now, it's whether this quiet, orderly system can hold as the world, and its own people, start aging out of it. But here's something even more mind-bending. Who actually owns all this debt? Let's pull back the curtain. Section 5. Who actually owns this debt? Okay, so we know countries are borrowing massive amounts of money. But here's the real mystery. Who are they borrowing from? Who's holding the trillions in IOUs from governments around the world? And what happens if those lenders want their money back? Let's start with a simple truth. Debt doesn't just disappear. For every borrower, there's a lender. And when it comes to national debt, the lenders are a surprisingly diverse, and sometimes sketchy, group. 1. Domestic investors. In most developed countries, the majority of government debt is owned by the country itself. Take Japan. Over 90% of its debt is held by Japanese citizens, banks, pension funds, and its central bank. In the US, more than 2/3 of government debt is held domestically by things like Social Security trust funds, state pension plans, American banks, investment firms like Vanguard and BlackRock, even everyday Americans through savings bonds and retirement accounts. So yes, if you're American and have a 401k, you probably own a piece of the national debt. Second, foreign governments. Now here's where it gets juicy. Roughly $7.6 trillion of US debt is held by foreign countries. The two biggest lenders, China, about $800 billion. Japan, over $1 trillion. Why would rival nations want to fund America's debt? Simple. It gives them leverage, influence, and a relatively safe return on investment. But there's a dark side to that trust. If major holders like China suddenly dumped US debt, it could send interest rates soaring and the dollar tanking. It's like your ex suddenly selling all your selfies online. Technically legal, but catastrophically awkward. Third, central banks. Then there's the wild card. Central banks, like the Federal Reserve, they can create money out of thin air to buy government bonds. During the COVID pandemic, the Fed snapped up trillions in debt to stabilize the economy. It's called quantitative easing, a fancy term for basically, we'll buy our own debt to keep the illusion going. It works, until it doesn't. So who owns national debt? Everyone. Governments, corporations, investors, regular people, even the country itself. It's a massive web of promises, trust, and financial smoke and mirrors. But if that trust ever cracks, if people stop believing those promises will be honored, the entire house of cards could fall. Which brings up a deeper question. Is debt always a bad thing? Or is it a necessary evil that keeps the global economy alive? Let's talk about it. Section 6. Is debt always bad? Pros and cons of national debt. Let's zoom out for a second. Debt sounds terrifying, especially when you hear words like trillions tossed around like pocket change. But here's the surprising truth. Debt isn't automatically the villain. Sometimes, it's the lifeline. Imagine national debt like a chainsaw. In skilled hands, it can build houses, cut paths, and fuel progress. In reckless hands, it destroys everything in its path. The bright side. Why debt can actually save economies. 1. Jumpstarts growth. When economies stall, governments can borrow to inject money, create jobs, and kickstart spending, keeping the machine alive. 2. Emergency lifeboat. During wars, pandemics, or crashes, debt lets countries act fast. No red tape, no waiting around for tax hikes. 3. Smart investments. Debt can fund education, infrastructure, innovation, the foundations for a richer, stronger future. In the right situation, borrowing isn't just smart, it's essential for survival. But here's where the story turns. The dark side. When debt mutates into disaster. 1. The interest trap. As debt grows, interest payments balloon. Every dollar spent on interest, a dollar stolen from schools, hospitals, and the future. 2. Suffocating private growth. Heavy government borrowing can squeeze out private businesses, choking innovation and opportunity. The confidence collapse. If lenders start doubting you'll ever repay, interest rates skyrocket, trust vanishes, and suddenly, the house of cards falls. And here's the scariest part. Debt becomes deadly when you're borrowing just to pay yesterday's bill. It's like maxing out one credit card to cover another, while planning your next shopping spree. Fun for a while, fatal in the end. So no, debt isn't evil. It's a double-edged sword. It's not the tool that matters. It's the hands holding it. And with the world's debt pile growing faster than ever, the real question is, how long can we keep dancing before the music cuts out? Let's break down what countries actually do when the debt mountain gets too high to climb. Section 7. How do countries repay or manage their debt? All right, so the debt is here, it's massive, and it's not going away overnight. But how do countries actually deal with it? Like, what's the plan? Is there a plan? Well, kind of. 1. Roll it over. This is the most common move. Instead of paying debt off, countries just borrow more to pay off the old debt. Sounds wild, but it works, as long as people keep lending. It's like refinancing your mortgage every few years and never touching the principal. 2. Grow the economy. This one's simple. If your economy grows faster than your debt, the debt-to-GDP ratio goes down. Think of it like increasing your income so that your car payment becomes less of a burden. More growth equals less scary debt. 3. Inflate it away. Governments can also let inflation rise, which makes old debt cheaper to repay in today's money. Sneaky? Yes. Effective? Also yes. It's like paying back a $1 loan, with dollars that are only worth 80 cents now. 4. Cut spending or raise taxes. The painful route. Austerity. Budget cuts. Tax hikes. Unpopular but sometimes necessary, especially when lenders start panicking. Think Greece during the Eurozone crisis. Not fun. 5. Negotiate or restructure. Poorer nations sometimes renegotiate their debt, ask for forgiveness, or restructure terms. It's like going to your lender and saying, "Look, I can't pay it all, but here's a better plan." Bottom line, countries don't always repay debt in the way you and I think of it. They manage it, stretch it, and pray the music keeps playing. But what happens when the music stops? That's where the future gets unsettling. Section 8. What does the future hold for global debt? We're living in a world powered by borrowed money. Governments aren't just spending future dollars. They're spending future trust. And the meter's still running. Aging populations, climate chaos, endless wars, rising inequality, AI revolutions. All of it demands more spending, and even more debt. Some economists say, relax, we've got this. Debt is the new normal. Others say we're riding a financial roller coaster with no brakes, just vibes and printing presses. The truth? Global debt won't break us all at once. It'll break slowly, then suddenly. And the scariest part, no one's really driving. So, is global debt a brilliant tool or a dangerous illusion? Are we building the future or borrowing it from a cliff? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you want more wild economic truths that no one's talking about, hit that like button and subscribe. Your brain deserves it.